Okay, so Marie-Laure. Blind since childhood, how does Doerr even begin to capture her world for readers who might not understand what that's like?
Well, I think that's the genius of Doerr's writing. He immerses you in her world through sound, touch, smell.
It's like he makes you, the reader, experience blindness, doesn't he?
Exactly. Like, remember that passage where he describes the ocean?
Welcome to Witter. Who Has Time to Read? The podcast that brings deep dives for busy minds. Listen to AI hosts Jane and Dane and get ready to unpack the world's most captivating books in just a fraction of the time. Whether commuting, working out, or just squeezing in a quick break, we deliver key insights, thought-provoking themes, and takeaways you can carry into your day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Plus, use our links in the description to purchase this book. Your support helps us bring more engaging book discussions to you. Listen and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Who has time to read? You do, with Witter.
So, ready to dive into all the light we cannot see.
Absolutely. I actually just finished rereading it last night.
Oh, wow. You must have some good insights to share then. I finished it a couple days ago and I'm still trying to process everything, you know?
It's definitely one of those books that stays with you.
For sure. So for our listeners, this book, it throws you right into World War II, but it does it in such a unique way.
Yeah, it's not your typical war story, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, you've got the historical backdrop of the war, but at its heart, it's really a story about, I don't know, connection and resilience and finding light in the darkest of times, you know?
It's about the human spirit, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And Doerr really captures those big questions in such a personal and intimate way.
Right. Even though the story takes place on this huge epic scale, you never lose sight of the individual lives impacted by the war.
Exactly. And he does that by focusing on these two unforgettable characters, Marie-Laure and Werner.
Their stories are so different, yet so intertwined, you know? You've got Marie-Laure, a blind French girl living in occupied France, and Werner, a German orphan who gets swept up in the Nazi war machine.
And Doerr, he doesn't just tell their stories side by side. He weaves them together, creating this tapestry of hope and despair, and just really makes you think about, could I endure that? How would I act?
It's really powerful how he does that. With Marie-Laure, you experience the world through her senses. You feel her fear and isolation as the Nazis close in on her town.
And with Werner, you see the allure and the terror of technology, especially through radio, and how it can be used for both good and evil. It makes you really think, doesn't it, about the tools we create and how we use them.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. So maybe we should start with the characters themselves.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, so Marie-Laure. Blind since childhood, how does Doerr even begin to capture her world for readers who might not understand what that's like?
Well, I think that's the genius of Doerr's writing. He immerses you in her world through sound, touch, smell.
It's like he makes you, the reader, experience blindness, doesn't he?
Exactly. Remember that passage where he describes the ocean?
Yeah.
He doesn't focus on the color or the vastness. He describes the crashing waves, the feel of the salt spray, the taste of the sea air.
It's so vivid, so real.
Right. It makes you realize how much we rely on sight and how limiting that can be.
Totally. And then you have Werner, who's fascinated by how things work, especially radios. It's like he sees the world in terms of circuits and frequencies.
And that fascination, it's both a blessing and a curse for him, right?
Right.
Because it's that very talent that draws him into the Nazi regime.
Yeah, he gets recruited to this special school because of his skills with radios. But then, it all takes a really dark turn.
Which brings up such an important question that I think we need to discuss. How much of who we become is shaped by our circumstances, our upbringing, the choices we make, the things that are essentially thrust upon us?
Ugh, that's a heavy one. But it's so relevant to both Marie-Laure and Werner's stories because they're both shaped by forces beyond their control, by the war, by their pasts, by the expectations placed upon them.
Absolutely. But within those constraints, they also find ways to exercise their agency, to make choices that define who they are, even in the face of incredible adversity.
And those choices, those acts of defiance, those moments of connection, they're what make this book so incredibly powerful.
It's like Doerr saying, look, even in the darkest of times, there's still light to be found. You just have to know where to look for it.
And sometimes that light comes from the most unexpected places.
In people. One of the things that really struck me about Marie-Laure's story is how important that model of Paris is for her.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just a toy. It's like a lifeline for her.
Right. It's her way of understanding the world, of navigating a city that wasn't built for someone who couldn't see.
And it's interesting how it evolves over time, doesn't it? Like it starts as this replica of their neighborhood, but then it becomes a representation of Saint-Malo, this new place that's both terrifying and familiar.
Exactly. It's like a symbol of her resilience, her ability to adapt and find her way, even when everything around her is changing.
And then there's Saint-Malo itself. Doerr really captures the atmosphere of a city under siege.
It's palpable, that sense of dread and uncertainty.
Yeah, like you can feel the walls closing in.
And the way he describes the occupation, it's so visceral, so immediate.
Like that line about the German language being like a weed.
Ugh, yeah, it sends shivers down your spine.
It's such a powerful image, and it really gets at how the occupation infiltrated every aspect of their lives,
Absolutely. It's in the food they eat or can't eat, the curfews, the constant fear of being caught doing something wrong.
And yet, even in that environment, you have these incredible acts of resistance.
Like Madame Manec, distributing those pamphlets right under the noses of the Nazis.
So brave. And then Etienne hiding that Jewish musician in his basement, risking everything to help someone in need.
It makes you think about what you would do in that situation.
Would you have that kind of courage? I don't know. It's a lot of pressure.
It's easy to say what you do, but when you're faced with those choices, with those impossible odds, it's a different story.
Totally. And it's not just about these grand acts of heroism either. It's the small, everyday acts of defiance that really stand out.
Like refusing to speak German or listening to forbidden radio broadcasts.
Those little acts of rebellion, they were a way of holding on to their humanity, of reminding themselves that they wouldn't be defined by the occupation.
Exactly. And it's in those moments that you see the true strength of the human spirit. That even in the face of oppression, there's this innate desire for freedom, for connection, for something bigger than yourself. And speaking of connection, let's talk about how Doerr brings Marie-Laure and Werner's stories together.
It's like watching two trains on a collision course, You can see it coming, but you can't look away.
And all those parallels, those little echoes between their lives, they start to add up.
Like the radio, it's this thread that connects them across continents, across enemy lines.
And it's through radio that their paths ultimately converge in Saint-Malo.
It's almost like you're holding your breath the entire time Werner's unit is getting closer and closer to Marie-Laure,
Oh, the tension is palpable.
It is. And you've got the bombing going on, the chaos, and Marie-Laure trapped inside that house, unaware of the danger, so close.
And Doerr does this amazing thing where he amplifies that tension through sound. Remember, like every creak of the floorboards, every explosion, it's heightened because we're experiencing it through Marie-Laure's ears.
You're right. You're right there with her in the darkness, every sound magnified, every nerve on edge.
Absolutely. It's almost claustrophobic, and it just builds this incredible sense of suspense.
And meanwhile, Werner, he's right there too, on the cusp of this life-altering decision.
He's been ordered to find the resistance broadcaster. But at the same time, he's starting to question everything he thought he knew about the war, about his role in it.
Especially once he recognizes that music, right? The music he used to listen to with his sister.
It's like a punch to the gut, that realization.
It is. Because suddenly the enemy has a face, a story, a shared love of music. It's not so black and white anymore.
And it makes you wonder, what would you do in that situation? Would you follow orders or listen to that tiny voice inside telling you something isn't right?
I mean, talk about an impossible choice.
It really is. But for Werner, that moment of recognition, it's a turning point. He chooses compassion over duty, humanity over ideology.
And that single act of kindness, protecting Marie-Laure, it speaks volumes.
Right. It's like Doerr is saying that even in the midst of unimaginable darkness, there's still room for hope, for redemption.
And that those fleeting moments of connection, of shared humanity, they can be enough to make all the difference.
They can be the light that guides us through the darkness.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this book so powerful, so enduring. It doesn't shy away from the horrors of war, but it also reminds us of the strength of the human spirit, our capacity for love and compassion, even in the face of unimaginable loss.
It's a story that asks us to confront difficult questions about ourselves, about the choices we make, the things we're willing to fight for.
And ultimately, I think that's what we're left with after finishing this book. Not answers, but a deeper understanding of what it means to be human in all its complexity.
To find the light, even when it seems impossible.
And to hold on to that light, even in the darkest of times.
And with that, I think we've surfaced from this deep dive.
We have. But the conversation doesn't end here. I want to hear from you, our listeners. What resonated with you most in All the Light We Cannot See? What light will you carry with you from this story? Join the conversation on our social media pages and let us know. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Witter, Who Has Time to Read? Produced by One Media. Please support the author by purchasing the book or audiobook using the link in the description. It's a great way to help keep the art of writing alive. And stay in the loop. Subscribe to our newsletter for updates on weekly deep dives. And don't forget to share your thoughts or suggest our next deep dive at witterpodcast@gmail.com.